valley.
Welcome to Talking Points on DBS Radio. Good morning to you. My name is Ivona John Baptist Lugi, and here's where I welcome you to Talking Points. It is Monday, the 25th day, the 26th, in fact. It is the 25th. It is the 25th. The 26th is budget day in Dominica, so it is the 25th, Monday. Some rain on the outside. But we welcome you to the studios of DBS Radio. We welcome you to Talking Points. We are on live on radio and on Facebook as well, as we bring you another discussion. This morning we continue with the series of programs on the EC bill. That's the Electronic Communications Bill. It is a bill which has been proposed as a means of really moving on the right trajectory where telecommunications in the OECS is concerned, in Dominica as well, of course, because we are part of this subgrouping. So the current Telecommunications Act will really replace this. In fact, the new bill, the new act, will replace the current act. So it is imperative that people are involved in drafting. The people that are involved, in fact, in drafting this bill can come on radio and speak to us and let us understand exactly what is being done. So they are here again, two of them who have been involved in this to help educate the populace. And so we are here with another program. And there are just some things that we must know. We have to be cognizant of what is happening in this space that we reside, that we live in. And we also have to know that a lot of things that happen further afield can affect us. So the price of gas has gone up. The cost of electricity is also up. Food security is another concern, another major one as well for a while now. Health challenges continue to take its toll. But if we make discussions like this our business, then we will be better informed. We will know more. There are many benefits that consumers can derive from this proposed EC bill. On the last program, we looked at the role and the functions of the dispute tribunal in this same EC bill, the Electronic Communications Bill. Before that, we focused on the rights of the consumer. This segment was very, very interesting. Something that really stayed with me when we had this program was when Bennett Thomas, who is the Director of Telecommunications in Dominica, he indicated that the EC bill gives customers the rights to really purchase the service that they need and that they can afford. So that is very important. What this is saying essentially is that there will be no more bundling or tying or merger of other services without the permission of the consumer. So you see a right that we, the consumers, have, and this is very important to know. We also looked at the proposed changes to the current Telecommunications Act and what this act is really intended to achieve. So we looked at this on a program we had earlier. We explored as well the issue of number portability, net neutrality as well, and these were very important discussions that we had in the past. Also, another interesting focus was that as a result of the legislative framework, the NTRC will be more empowered to address consumer issues more effectively. And we learned a lot about the NTRC, that's the National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. Earlier on, and I'll be ending in a while, earlier on we also looked at ECTEL, the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, and what it is really. So we defined ECTEL, its governing structure, its constitution. On the very first program as well, we had the minister on, Senator Oscar George, who has responsibility for telecommunications and broadcasting in Dominica. He had a lot to say as it regards the signing of the St. George's Declaration. So that took place in Grenada, particularly the area that really speaks to the reduction of intra-roaming charges. And this is very significant. So we have to sort of remember these things. Cheaper rates, faster, greater speed, greater convenience as well. So there is no doubt that a more robust EC bill, electronic communications bill, has been put forward. And I believe I have said enough. So let me go to Studio 2 to say good morning to my guests. As I said, we have the Director of Telecommunications, Mr. Bennett Thomas, and we also have with us in studio Mr. Craig Nesty, who is the Executive Director of the NTRC, the National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. Good morning, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you on again. Welcome.
Good morning, Ivona. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning, Ivona, and good morning to all your listeners. Thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you. You are here ahead of Budget Day, a very big day in Dominica, of course, especially when you consider Budget Day comes at a time when we continue to face so many challenges. But we still continue the discussion on the Electronic Communications Bill. And for us, that is really important. I know we have a special focus this morning, Mr. Bennett Thomas, so I know you'd want to look at that. I think we're looking at the Universal Service and Access Fund. So that really is our focus this morning. As I said, in the past weeks, we have had several discussions. We have had subjects that we would have looked at. And there are many more programs to come, by the way, because remember, as we said from the onset, that this is part of the education campaign, the sensitization drive to let me know, all of us know more about this very important piece of legislation where telecommunications, electronic communications more so is concerned. All right, so we're going to look at Universal Service and Access Fund. But what is this really saying, though? Mr. Thomas, what should we concern ourselves with? What should immediately come to mind when we hear about the Universal Service and Access Fund?
Okay, to try to break it down to the basic person on the street, some time ago we spoke about universal service or universal education, and that meant seeking to bring education to every child possible in Dominica, so that if you leave school, some child can have some form of education. In the telecommunication space, it's a similar thing. Universal service seeks to provide some form of telecommunication to every single person in the country. Now, you'll understand that telecom service providers will seek to get maximum profits as quickly as possible, and as a result, they will try to go to areas where they can get their money faster. Most likely, of course, in the capital cities and so forth. And usually, the underserved areas, less economical areas where they cannot get that kind of revenue, although they will say, okay, I will eventually reach there, their priority for economic reasons is usually where they can get a quicker return on their investment.
When you say underserved areas, what exactly?
So you'll find in every country you might have areas that are not as economically strong as others. The terrain might be difficult to bring the kind of service you want to bring there, and as a result, those persons are not allowed that same kind of service. But you have to understand that telecommunication service is not for certain types of persons. It is a basic need, just as you drink water or you eat food. So it's a lifeline. And as a result, every single person should have some form of access to telecommunication services. So what the Universal Service Fund and Access, which we'll discuss in much greater detail soon, is to ensure that every single region in Dominica has some form of basic communication service. Because it's so critical in terms of its lifeline. We see what happened after Hurricane Maria. every single community ought to have some form of communication, whether it's a basic cell phone, whether it's by satellite, whether it's by Wi-Fi, something, so they can communicate with their friends and relatives. Otherwise, they'll be cut off totally. And that's what universal service access is seeking to do, to ensure that persons who are not as affluent as others, but they need service, they are human beings, they need to have service. And some areas might not be conducive sufficiently for the players to go there at this time, as you have been hearing. And they say, okay, of course we have plans for the whole country, but we are going in Roseau first. We are taking Roseau first. We are doing Portsmouth next. Notice they're not doing, quote-unquote, areas that are not quickly turned up, get their revenue on, because it's not as economically viable for them to do so right away. And that universal service seeks to address those issues.
That might be a strain for the service provider. I'm just wondering. I don't know. Because when you said that it may not be really viable for them to sort of service certain areas.
Well, you see, it is every government, the government's client are the people. The service provider's main objective are their shareholders.
Amen. I wanted to get that from you.
So you notice there are two different issues being addressed. And therefore it is, we'll talk about that a little in more detail, but because government has to ensure that every single citizen has some form of communication access, that is a government policy decision, that is an ECTEL policy decision, and as a result it has to be done. Now, that is where the fund comes in, we will talk about later. Where the fund goes up, Mr. Nessie will deliberate further on that. But the fund comes in to facilitate that process. But you need persons, not because they are not as affluent as others. Some persons cannot have that kind of service. A cell phone is very expensive, you know.
Oh yes.
And to bring this service in very rugged areas is a challenge also for the service providers. And that's why they will say, okay, we are not saying that we will not do it. We are simply saying we'll do it at a certain time. As to how long that time is a different matter. That is where the universal service comes now to close that gap and facilitate the process.
All right. Very, very interesting. So you said the fund comes in to facilitate the process. Very, very important. So here you come in, Mr. Nesty. It's a fund, and obviously contributions are expected to be made to such a facility, to a fund. How is this done? Explain to us.
Well, I would like to say I agree with everything that Mr. Bennett said before. I just want to put one distinction between the Universal Service Access Fund and Universal Education. And I've just become privy to that situation. Universal Education, in certain situations, is not transparent and it's not open. Right? It's very nebulous in the ways that they select students for high school. Because it's universal, they say. So they are very subjective in their manner in which they select students to attend secondary school, because everyone must attend. So I just found out that it's not based on merit. It's not based on your scores at the common entrance exam. It's based on a very subjective decision made by a very few people to determine the fate of the young students who've studied so hard. And this was very disheartening for me to find out. So having said that, Universal Service Fund and Access distinguish itself from that completely.
But while so everyone will find their names on the list, everyone will be on the list. I know there are situations whereby whether a student is on the list or students are on the list, sometimes the teachers, the principal, sometimes the parents as well, decide that this child should stay another year. But anyway, that's for another discussion.
That's another discussion. But I think you need a discussion with the Ministry of Education, so that I can call in and ask my questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the Universal Service and Access Fund is completely transparent. So everything is managed in an open and transparent, non-discriminatory fashion, unlike universal education. And it baffles me that in the 21st century, universal education is administered in such a fashion. So how is the fund managed? Well, we have a Universal Service Fund coordinator who receives proposals from anybody in Dominica can submit a proposal to the Universal Service Fund. Those proposals are then brought to a commission of 5 who assess the merits of the proposal, and then a bidding document is prepared and issued to all telecommunications providers and service providers in Dominica. And based on the responses from those bidders, a transparent and open evaluation is done, and the bid is awarded to the successful bidder. So in that fashion, the public gets to see the full administration of the fund and can comment and make remarks based on the management of that fund. Right now, the fund contributions are free 1% of the gross revenue of the telecommunications providers. So it doesn't matter whether the providers make a profit or not. Whatever their gross revenue is, they need to pay 1% of that. And that was done based on a graduated scale. It started off at 3, it went down to 2, and now it's 1% every year that the provider has been in operation.
1%?
Yeah.
Okay.
And 10% of the fund is used to administer the fund. The fund is also administered in a completely independent manner to the finances of the NTRC. So the fund has its own fund administrator, the fund does its own fund accounting, and the fund prepares those audited financials to the Minister of Telecoms, which is laid before Parliament. So it's very, very open, very, very transparent. Anybody in Dominica, and I think anybody in Dominica can review those and critique those and make suggestions, recommendations for the improvement of the fund. And I think that's important for institutions such as telecommunications and education and other institutions, the judicial institute. I think openness and transparency should be very, very critical. And it only resonates in you when it affects you.
Transparency,
Yes.
very important, as you said. So it's like due diligence is being done, there's openness.
Yes.
All right, so I understand this more now. Bennett Thomas, but is there a specific role, though, in that case that the minister has? I know we have not brought in, what role the minister plays in all of this.
Well, again, as we said, everything is legislation, and according to the legislation, the minister, by order published in the Gazette and on the recommendation of ECTEL, and it's important to notice that the whole issue of accountability and transparency and so forth, the minister works upon recommendation from ECTEL, because ECTEL is the regulatory authority. And once the ECTEL has so done that recommendation, the minister now, according to law, is able to have an order in the Gazette so that everybody can see what has happened. And in that role, he can specify the electronic communication service, what type of service, the equipment, what type of equipment, the geographic area, which is very important. The minister has that right to do that. The population group or institution to which universal service and access applies. And that is a very, very important point.
But if the minister doesn't maybe agree to something that's there, does he have the power to make amendments?
Well, I assume so, but it is those what I just read from you there is from the laws of the country. So if the minister and Parliament is the one that, and ECTEL are the one that do the laws, if they want to make some adjustment to the laws because of issues in the community or change in technology or whatever, he has that authority, but he does it through the normal legislative process. But in the meantime, once that has not been changed, he has to abide by the laws of that on the books. But he has that authority if he realizes that there are certain things that can be changed because technology has changed, circumstances has changed. He can meet with and pass it, go through the normal process to allow it to happen. Right? Also, the percentage of the gross annual revenue, the minister is the one who can specify that. He can specify the percentage of the gross annual revenue which a licensee must contribute to the Universal Service and Access Fund, which shall be the same for all licensees. So he cannot discriminate against this person give them 10%, but this one do 5%. No, the law prohibits him from acting that way.
It has to be fairly done across the board.
Yes, but he can determine in law what that percentage of the gross amount can be.
All right, very interesting. And if you're just tuning in, welcome. We are on to Talking Point. The Electronic Communications Bill, of course, it's in its draft form, and it will be taken to Parliament at some point, and then it will become an act. We have had a series of programs on a Monday looking at the EC bill in its entirety, and we have discussed various subjects as far as this bill is concerned. This morning we are looking at Universal Service and Access Fund under this EC bill. So imagine, apart from the many benefits that consumers will derive, even this one, the Universal Service and Access Fund, there are a lot of benefits for consumers as well. So hence the reason why I said from the onset that it is important that we listen to discussions like that, and we learn and seek information, of course. And if you have a question, you have a suggestion, feel free, and you can call us. So we're discussing this morning with the Telecommunications Director in Dominica, who is Mr. Bennett Thomas, and also Craig Nesty. And Craig Nesty is the Executive Director of the NTRC, the National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. And of course, you'd be hearing the saying ECTEL. And ECTEL is the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority. So let us move on as we continue with the discussion here this morning. And as I said, we are looking at the Universal Service and Access Fund. So what then, though, Mr. Thomas, are the objectives of the fund? I know we would have mentioned it throughout, but I want to let us look at this specifically at this time in terms of the objectives of the fund. You may also want to give examples in some cases.
Okay, so according to what is on the books, the objective of the fund, one is to ensure efficient access, and notice the word efficient, access to and the use of electronic communications network and an electronic communication service throughout Dominica, with special focus on rural, underserved, and maritime areas, with a goal to help promote social, educational, and economic development. I'm going to pause there for
I was just about to tell you, please say this again or break it down for us.
Notice it is to ensure efficient access. And access is different from the actual service. Some persons may not have access to any service at all. And the role of that fund is to ensure, and the objective of the fund is to ensure that every single Dominican, especially those in the rural and underserved areas, that is a critical point that needs to be highlighted. Rural, because as I said before and earlier, the priority is usually on what the industry calls cherry picking. You choose where you want to go to get a maximum return on your investment. That is called cherry picking, and technically you will want to get your money back as quickly as possible. Everybody has that objective, but at the same time, because of the nature of the service, every single human being in Dominica, every household, ought to have some form of communication service. It's a basic need according to the World Trade Organization, according to the ITU. This is our basic need. In the days of 1910,
it's a difference.
That was just for certain persons.
Yes.
It was a luxury. Now, you cannot do without communication. Every single aspect of our lives is somehow connected to some form of communication. And therefore, the ITU, which is the International Telecommunications Union, which is an arm of the United Nations for which all countries subscribe, make it mandatory that basic communication must be available to persons.
So you're telling me that even because of our terrain, and it may not be feasible for a service provider, in the past probably they could have gotten away with this, but now things have changed.
Well,
they have to ensure that even in rural communities, even where it's difficult, they have to ensure that mechanisms are put in place to ensure that people there receive service as well.
And that is why the laws are there. That is why ECTEL is here. That's why the government is here. Because if you leave it up to the service provider, certain persons will not get service, simply because of economics. Because, for example, if you were to bring service to a most remote area in Dominica, where persons hardly have funds available to make a monthly payment, you saw Mr. Nesty had that net for all. And even that, because of the stringent terms of it, so to speak, persons were still unable to provide because you have to keep paying.
Yeah.
Even though I tell you $20, you have to find the $20 every month to pay. And some persons may not be able to. And because of the necessity of the service, the Universal Service Fund ensures that access is given to. And that is where there has to be some kind of collaboration between the government, the regulator, and the service providers to ensure that this Universal Access and Service Fund becomes effective for everybody, because it has to be a collaborative effort. Another thing it says is that it has to ensure the reasonable availability. That is the words again, the reasonable, that is subjective, but the reasonable availability and affordability of a basic and advanced electronic communication service over both wired and wireless networks at the community, household, or individual level. Now, again, the whole issue of availability and affordability of service. I can bring the service to you next to your house. That's access and availability to you. But, but is it affordable? So you might watch the line, but you can't get the service. So the universal, one of the objectives of the fund is it has to be affordable. Now, you might argue that the service providers might say, well, it cost me how many billions or millions of dollars to get this because I have to run so much infrastructure to reach you. Well, which is more important? The livelihood of somebody, the death of somebody, the right person needs access. If somebody is sick, they need to have service. They need to call somebody. So is that
I like this. This is really people-centered.
Yes.
I really love this.
You know, it's really targeting the consumer. And that is why I'm saying again, that is where the collaboration comes in. We have to take care of everybody. But again, if I sit in the position of the service providers, they say, boy, look, I ain't getting money for that at all. I spend how many millions of dollars to get the cable up there, and I'm not getting anybody. So you can maybe understand their point. And that is where Mr. Nesty and his team comes in nicely with the Universal Service.
All right, so we're discussing the Universal Service and Access Fund. We're discussing, of course, the EC bill, the Electronic Communication Bill. If you have a question, or you may have a suggestion, or you may just want some clarification on something that was said earlier, you could call us on 1-800-327-448-3284, 6161-327. It is already 10 o'clock. We end at 10:30. We have another program coming up at 10:30 as well. But it is really, interesting to be discussing this. Yes, Mr. Thomas, you want to bring in something?
Yes, there are a number of other points, but in the same point, it says here, in providing that service based on the type of service, it says particularly if the commercial electronic communications market may be unable to deliver such services in a financially viable manner independently, as well as to the physically challenged, elderly, and indigenous communities. So in other words, it caters for the less fortunate people. Because somebody on their home, they might be incapacitated, they may not be the elderly. They are human beings. They need access to a phone. They can stay on the phone and call and say, I am hurt. Call their family and say, look, I just fell here. And these are the basic things we're asking for, that persons have access so that, because this is a lifeline situation. Your life and death could be on the line because of that. And persons can die because of lack of communication.
Universal access, that's what we're talking about. Now, Mr. Nesty, it is obvious that the NTRC plays a very crucial role in all of this. Help us understand how the Commission goes about the management of the Universal Service and Access Fund.
Okay. Before we jump to the management of that, I just want to add two things that the Universal Service and Access Fund added that the current Universal Service Fund does not have as an objective. And I think those are critical considering the state that Dominica is in right now.
So currently it's not there?
Currently it's not there.
Okay,
but they've added. They've added support the development of locally relevant information, content or applications to be delivered over an electronic communications network. So what it means that the Universal Service Fund now can be used to support mobile application creation, web development, electronic programs that would facilitate the use of business and the use of services in Dominica. Prior to that, the Universal Service Fund was focused on physical infrastructure, right? So we at the NTRC have always advocated for expanding the use of the fund into those other areas, because what we've realized is, even if the cables run in front of your home, like Bennett is saying, it's accessible, it's available, and it may be affordable, but if it's not relevant to you, if the farmer doesn't see a need to have internet access to promote the sale of his produce or to make farming much more efficient, then it's unlikely that the farmer will want to pay $50 a month for a service that he sees no value in. So we've expanded the fund to make it more valuable to the...
Give that example again in terms of the farmer.
Okay.
Yes. I'm saying this, because sometimes after the program, I get people call and, they want explanation on certain things that have been said, especially when it pertains to them.
Okay.
So let's give this example again.
So one of the things you could do with the Universal Service Fund right now is basically put a proposal in for funding for, say, an agricultural marketplace, a digital marketplace, where farmers could probably say that they have so many acres of dashing planted today, and they would be harvesting that in 9 months, right? Hucksters could go to that site and say, okay, I'm going to buy that dashing from you in advance, and you're contracted to deliver that to me. So preparing those electronic platforms, making the internet more relevant to the farmers, are activities now that the fund can support. So prior to that, all the fund could do was bring the cables in front of the farmer. Now, young entrepreneurs, innovators can use the fund to actually promote applications that will make it relevant in the market, so the farmer can benefit, the fisherman can benefit, and so forth. So these funds are now, well, when the bill is passed, because the bill has not been passed.
Yes.
When the bill is passed, these funds will now be able to be utilized in that sphere as well.
Yeah, but let me follow up with what Craig has said, because we're basically talking about farm to market and making sure that you have access to the marketplace. But it is also important that the farmer, we do not want you to be a doctorate in telecommunications, but you should have some basic way of inputting your produce on say a tablet or something, to say, okay, once you can link your information, say in the field, and say you have 200 plants of this and 400 plants of that, you drop that into a basic database on your handset. That goes back to Dexia or somebody, and it's, hey, John Brown over in Dodan just sent information. He has 500 plants coming up in that time. Dexia and the rest of the people can say, okay, I have access to the market, and therefore, okay, notify the guys, look, in 2 months' time, we have how many dashing plants coming in. We have how many potato coming in. But on the ground, the farmer needs to be able sometime, because we're talking about the digital economy now.
Oh, yes, and this creates exciting opportunities for farmers.
You're talking about digital economy.
Yes.
Too many times we are waiting for the nuts and bolts and concrete. No, we are not seeking to make you an expert in computer science. No, we're not doing that. Basic, let me tell you something. I went over to Singapore once, and we talk about we want to be like Singapore, but it took years for it to be like Singapore, because they took the necessary steps to facilitate that. We have to have an objective where we want to go. If we say we have a digital economy, then everybody has to take part in that. It including the farmer, including the hairdresser. Everybody
cannot be business as usual.
No, because you want to be able to attract business and get things going. And if you're able to do that, I was saying I was in Singapore, and everywhere I pass, somebody had a tablet in there and putting information in. Information is key. If you have the information, you can make strategic
decisions.
Because
I have had several discussions, like maybe with the Fisheries Cooperative and other departments, and they tell you one of the problems that they have, of course, they are overcoming it now, but in terms of record keeping and documenting and things like that. So
that is very, very important.
This creates that opportunity for even the farmers.
The key to all of this is data. If I have the data, I can begin to make intelligent decisions and be able to make strategic ones too. And that is why, down to the very farmer level, as in the example that Craig gave, is important, because once we have that information documented and in a database or somewhere, then the relevant authority to do the marketing and so forth can begin to, and farmers will get their income, because they say, okay, you get back to the farmer on the ground and tell him, okay, we just found out, John Brown, that in 2 months' time, this company says they want 500 set of dashes. Oh, you're excited. But that's how the work has to be done by putting the information in. So
I
that's
like this. I really love this. That's why I had to ask Craig Nesty to reiterate what he had just said, especially when it put into the farmer. Not just the farmer, you know. And
No,
as you
that's an
mentioned,
example, yes.
you know, you get the hairdresser and a lot of people,
Exactly,
you know, a lot of
exactly.
people, entrepreneurs can really benefit from this.
So like Bennett is saying, the fund now moves to advance the digital economy,
Right.
as opposed to just providing physical, technical access in the past, right? So the fund also will allow for providing human resource training and capacity building, right, in supporting a fund project. So, example, Bennett is saying that the farmer doesn't have to be a computer scientist, but the fund can be used to upskill the farmers.
That's correct.
And make them aware of the technology and how to use the technology to provide the much needed data that Dexia would need to advance farming and improve efficiencies in that sector.
I like this.
And one more thing though, the fund also provides grants for information and communication technology entrepreneurial startups. So once the act is passed, we don't have a situation in Dominica where we have venture capital funding. Normally these young entrepreneurs have to take a loan, they have to mortgage their parents' homes, they have to risk it all to try something. Well, the fund now will be able to provide grant funding for these sort of activities that promote information and communications technology, entrepreneurial activity. So it hasn't been implemented yet, the bill hasn't been passed, but invariably it would be an open, transparent, non-discriminatory process where applications will be put forward and there will be an evaluation process. It will publicly be available, and successful entrepreneurs will be receiving grants to go out and try to build those innovative solutions for the Dominican market. So
interesting.
That
I like
is a
it.
very
I like
exciting
this.
aspect of the fund that is now implemented within the funding mechanism for the Universal Service Fund and Access.
But you'll notice that we are talking about telecommunication.
Oh yes. So
you notice, because of the synergies between telecommunication and what we call information and communication technology, this whole issue of digital transformation incorporates everything. You cannot work in isolation because you need legislation in telecom, you need the infrastructure, you need to put the necessary services in place. But the country should be so connected that every aspect is somehow linked.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certain countries that decide, I'm going to do business with you if you have a digital policy, you know.
I tell you, yeah.
You want a digital policy because that's how they interact.
Yeah.
And
this nexus, this synergy, this link.
Yeah. So it's important for us to see that this is not a compartmentalized area. All things are connected somehow. There are synergies in health, there are synergies in education, right? If somebody comes in, if you have a madman coming in, say some crazy guy comes in, you know, the police has information in his database. He goes into the database, he links that, he sends a text over to a guy over in Portsmouth and tell him, hey, this guy is passing through that, stop him from it. That interaction is there. You can interact with every aspect of society if we put it right and get things right.
Very, very interesting discussion here this morning with Mr. Craig Nesty and Bennett Thomas. Yes,
back
Craig.
to your question. How does the Commission go about management of the Universal Service Fund? We didn't really answer that because I touched on a few other aspects of the fund that I thought were relevant, the entrepreneurial activity, training, and
thanks
so
for drawing that to my attention. So let's answer this, of course. we need to have an answer on this.
Yeah, well, the NTRC with the Commission will develop appropriate indicators of electronic communications access within Dominica. So the indicators would mean what's the penetration level? So is the penetration level in Dodan the same as Roseau? Is there something we need to do to improve penetration in Capuchin versus penetration in Marigot, right? So do all children in these communities have access to the internet in some way, shape, or form? So there will be different key performance indicators for different geographic locations in Dominica.
So you're telling me what, a survey will be done? Or
yes, surveys are done continually. It's called a gap analysis, and that's done by the fund administrator to determine where are the gaps in society for broadband connectivity. And the fund has primarily been used for broadband because the Commission and the Minister has basically mandated that broadband is one of the most essential commodities for the Dominican public right now. Broadband has been tantamount to be saying that it's
Bridge,
no, it's
highway,
no, not bridge and highway, but a right, a fundamental human right for you to have broadband,
Yeah.
right? And as a child growing up in Dominica, part of the NTRC's mandate, especially with our USF program Net for All, is to ensure that no child is left behind, and every child who is part of any education system in Dominica has access to the internet and has access to an access device that can access the internet.
And, and as Mr. Nati said, he talked about broadband, right? And the policy of the government is to ensure that there is broadband access. What we need to know, how do we define broadband? What constitutes broadband? And that's something that we have put some decisions and policies forward about. If the days of 2 megabit capacity is out of the window long. Now, what do you call broadband? What constitutes broadband? And these are the kind of topics that we have to discuss, so that when you say you have broadband service in a digital economy, what does that mean? Can I send files? Can I send pictures? Or when I send the first thing, the company tells I have to keep buying more capacity. What constitutes broadband? And these are the kind of the discussion we need to have.
Definitely.
To ensure.
I like this.
Yeah.
The other part of management of the
Yes,
fund,
Craig.
and I'm not sure if you have to break or anything, but the other part of management of the fund is enforcing the collections, because without the providers paying into the fund, there is no fund, right? So the new legislation will put stricter requirements on ensuring that the providers submit their annual financials, because the fund is based on gross revenue, and ensure that they contribute to the fund as required by law.
All right.
But I know you're going for a thing, but here is something I think that is important. It says you must liaise and consult with the minister and ECTEL to promote consistency between the operation of the fund and national and regional electronic communication policies. So you see how the fund is tied to policy. Because if the government says, as a part of the policy of this country, every single person must have access to some form of communication, that is the policy, and he can translate that into his legislation. But that is government's policy. And the NTRC and the fund has an obligation, and the service providers, therefore, has an obligation to ensure that every citizen follow that policy.
Interesting. So Craig Nesty mentioned a fund administrator, and I really wanted to find out who administers this, who is the person who has that role to play. So let us look at, say, the criteria that one has to meet in order to hold such a position, and also what is the role of the fund administrator. So yes, someone has met the criteria, someone got the job, but what is the role of this person? I want to find out.
Well, the role of this person is to report to the...
But even before we get to the role, though, I would like to know about the criteria, the qualifications,
okay.
What you need to...
Well, in the new act, the person would have to have an accredited university or chartered or certified institute qualification. They'd have to be a graduate of one of those things. So like accountancy, you can become a chartered accountant without actually going to university. So I guess if you're a chartered accountant, you would qualify for that particular role. They would have to have knowledge and experience in one of the following fields: management, finance, accounting, electronic communications, and I think that's more in line with telecommunications as opposed to just communicating.
Because this is broad.
Yeah. And any other field related to ensure adequate performance of the requirements of the position. So they've put in some requirements in the act, but then they've also relaxed it at the end to ensure that people who have other redeeming qualities may be suitable for providing that particular activity, right? The person shall not have a conflict of interest with regards to the fund. So that person shouldn't be inclined to misappropriate the use of the funds in any way, shape, or form, right?
You laugh at this, Mr. Thomas?
No,
Is there
because
some...
it's very important. That's very important.
Say it again, Mr.
Say it again.
Yes, say this again. Let me digest this properly.
The person should not be inclined to misappropriate the use of the funds in any way, shape, or form. Right? The person should be there to serve the public and to use the funds in the interests of the public and in line with the policies of the Minister of Telecommunications.
Okay.
Right? It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money in the fund. At one point, I think the fund in Dominica may have stood at about $3-4 million. The funds are also representative of the size of our economies. Like in St. Lucia, the fund was up to $15 million, right? And in some of the other OECS islands, like St. Kitts had a fund of $9 million, right? So the fund is reflective of the level of economic activity you have within your state. So you can take a look at all of the fund contributions across the islands and you get a sense of how much, because the fund is really a percentage of gross revenue. So the size of the telecom markets in these jurisdictions will tell you the size of the fund that these countries would have at their disposal. Right? But even if we were one of the smallest, it's still amounted to about $4 million for between $3 and $4 million cumulatively, right? So I won't say $3 and $4 million annually, but at one point the fund was that amount of money.
All right.
And the fund administrator is subject to the direction of the commission and shall do all things necessary for the incidental or necessary for and incidental to proper functioning of the fund. So the fund administrator basically is under the direct control of the NTRC. And the NTRC will ensure that the fund administrator uses the funds in a manner that's consistent with the policies for telecommunications in Dominica.
Okay. So, under the direct control of the NTRC.
Yes.
So, let me ask you, though, Bennett Thomas, is there a role for ECTEL in the management of this fund?
Again, the NTRC is not a government by itself. The NTRC is technically an arm of ECTEL. So, the laws that were put together, while it's simply a matter of management of the funds, because remember, Mr. Nesty just told you that even though they might be under the fund is under the direct jurisdiction of the commission, at the end of the year when he makes his report to Parliament,
he has to report
to go to government.
Okay.
So it is transparent. Yeah? But
I can just shed some clarity on this. So, like in the first session you had with the minister, where they probably explained the roles and functions of the NTRC, ECTEL, and the ministers, the process is such that you have something called a Council of Ministers, where all the ministers of the OECS meet. I think they meet twice a year, where they basically establish policies for the entire region. So they would have those high-level discussions, and they will come to an agreement as to what the policies are for the region. And the reason for that is it has to be harmonized across the OECS states. And that attracts investors from outside the OECS to come into that market, because they know if they come to Dominica, the laws, regulations, rules pertaining to their operations are very similar to if they went to St. Lucia. So they don't have to deal with the regulatory burden of reinventing the wheel to deal with different jurisdictions. So this harmonization of policies is done at a regional level. Out of those policies, ECTEL concretizes that into law. So ECTEL makes rules and laws that they hand down to all the NTRCs in the different islands. The NTRCs now are where the rubber hits the road, where you basically take those laws, take those rules, and you implement them. So the NTRC cannot decide to just act oblivious to those policies, rules, regulations that have been developed through that process. So when you ask, is there a role for the minister? Yes, there's a role for the minister, but it's a very high-level policy role. And it has been designed like that so that you don't have what you call ministerial contagion. The minister, for example, wouldn't be able to just pick up the phone in any NTRC region and say, I want you to do XYZ right now, if it is not consistent with what they've already agreed as a policy decision at the Council of Ministers level.
All right. I'm just looking at a WhatsApp message there, and someone is asking. Someone is saying, I want to ask the guests of the program to indicate how does one submit a proposal to the fund? Can individuals apply? So that's a question from the person.
Well, that's two different questions. Can they submit a proposal and can they apply?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what they're applying for, right? But they can submit a proposal that is consistent with the goals of the fund. Now, once that proposal is submitted, the Universal Service Fund Administrator will evaluate that proposal and she will prepare a bidding document, because she can't just take the proposal and hand it to a provider. So she prepares a bidding document, and all providers in Dominica get a chance to bid on that proposal. So if Flow can submit a proposal, but that doesn't mean that Flow will get it. Digicel can submit a proposal, but that doesn't mean that they will get it. The proposal comes in and a bidding document is created from that proposal, and it is sent out to tender, where all of the providers in the market submit a bid for that project, and the best applicant will win the project. Now, in terms of can she apply, I'm not sure what she meant she could apply for, but she can definitely apply for Net for All, for example, which is a fun project, if she feels that she...
I think she's speaking on behalf of an organization that she has... she's
right, okay. So, in the new fund, when they talk about technological entrepreneurial activity, in the new fund,
okay,
there will be different... There was a certain amount of money set aside to promote that kind of entrepreneurial activity, and some of that money will actually be grant funding. So in that, once the act is passed, in that new dispensation, she should be able to apply for grants to provide, it has to be an electronic telecommunications application service that promotes the Universal Service Fund. If that is the business that she's into, she should be able to apply for the fund as a grant or as some sort of economic stimulation to provide that service.
I think...
But
go ahead.
It is not available under the current Telecommunications Act.
Yes, we have to make
that's
note of this, yes.
That's the new dispensation.
But notice, as just for a little
Thomas.
dicing, it says to provide grant funds for information and communication technology entrepreneurial startups. Whatever you send in has to be consistent with that policy. You can't go and call and say, I want to open a bike shop. Bike shop is not in line with that. So it has to be consistent with the policies set out in the legislation. And once we do it there, then Mr. Industry and his team can take it. But I just wanted to clarify that.
So there are several projects that can be supported under the fund, but it has to fall in line.
It has to fall in line.
All right. We are almost to the end of the program as we look at the Universal Service and Access Fund under the Electronic Communications Bill. Remember, this is a bill. It's in its draft form. It's not. It has not been passed in Parliament. What it has done, though, is look at the current bill, and it has made several amendments to suit the time. So it comes at an opportune time for all of us, and I know that will benefit tremendously. Let's get closing remarks, gentlemen. I see we're already running out of time. There are some things I would have liked us to expound on further, but because of time constraints, we'll get closing remarks at this time. Let's start with you, Mr. Craig Nesty. What would you leave for the listeners at this time?
Well, I think one of the key differences with this bill and what exists in the market is the promotion of entrepreneurial activity and the promotion of startups and new initiatives in the market. And I think we absolutely need this in Dominica. I think we need to create more economic activity, more businesses, more corporations. I think Dominica is one of the few places where personal income tax outstrips corporate tax. So in such a situation, it doesn't really abode for a vibrant economic climate, and we absolutely need this. So I would implore that the fund gets passed if not just for this activity to be kicked off, so that the youth, the young entrepreneurs, the people in the market looking to engage in telecommunications and electronic entrepreneurial activities have an opportunity to get this going. But all of the other ancillary benefits that comes along with the new electronic communications bill, I think is absolutely necessary. We will never get it right the first time. There will always be room for improvement. I guess that's why you have amendments to the bill and amendments to the act. And I think the parliamentary machinery, if it moved in alignment with the telecommunication sector, where you have revisions of applications and so forth, it would serve Dominica very, very well.
Bennett Thomas, let's get your closing remarks.
Yes, I think what is critical is that every single household, at least, especially those in the rural communities, should have some form of access. And not only access, but affordability of that service. And I'm looking forward to the day when every community in Dominica, and by extension in the OECS, irrespective of how underserved you might figure they are, they have some form of entrepreneurial action based on the whole synergies of telecommunication and ICT, that you can stay in a remote community and interface with government services, interface with your income tax with insurance companies, and you don't have to move around. And that is critical, especially in the rural communities. So I hope we can have this bill passed so that we can begin to implement those kind of policies that we are looking for.
All right. Very interesting discussion this morning, gentlemen. I really enjoyed it. I look forward to the next program, and that would be the Monday after. I think the next Monday is a holiday. It's August Monday, so we will have the program the other Monday, and I really look forward to what we'll be discussing then. It's always interesting, of course, that we go back to some of the things that we would have raised in prior programs with a view to really understanding what this bill is saying. So let me thank you again for joining us. You are regulars, part of the DBS family, always on. I see you even dressed the same. So this says a lot. This says a lot. Let me thank you for joining us this morning. Talking Points was brought to you. Compliments, Flo Dominica. Thanks again.
Thanks again.
All right then.
In September 2017, our lives here in Dominica changed forever. Hurricane Maria took our homes, lives of our loved ones, and left us with billions of dollars in damages to repair.